Hey guys, welcome back to Critical Flick. Today I'll be reviewing the Beanie Bubble, coming soon to Apple TV+. So the Beanie Bubble tells the story of the rise and fall in popularity of these little guys. If you're my age or older, you probably remember your family collecting these things, thinking that, they're going to be this store of value, this collectible that's, going to make all this money over the years, and then slowly things collapsed, and then by the end of the 90s, they were essentially worthless. While the story does focus around Ty Warner, who's played by Zach Galifianakis, the movie is really more about the women in his life that actually really helped build this empire, whether it be his original business partner, someone who started at his company from a secretary level and slowly grew to become one of the largest parts of that company, forcing, the reseller market and driving demand, or even, love interest in his life that helped create the idea of the Beanie Baby. I do think that Zach Galifianakis gives a really solid performance in this film. I really like Zach Galifianakis. He's an actor I feel brings a very strange and unique energy to his roles, and this movie is definitely not an exception to that. He plays this egotistical, bizarre man-child who can't handle basically reality. He's someone who's constantly manipulating people. He's very deceptive, and he's playing kind of different roles. He's playing kind of this front-facing, charismatic CEO while being this kind of almost lunatic and behind the scenes. I think the supporting roles were also pretty solid. In particular, Elizabeth Banks, who plays Robbie, his original business partner. She has to play someone who is really having a more complete arc than probably anyone else in this film. In the beginning of the movie, she's someone who's really down on their luck and helping to build this empire with one of her friends, which ends up becoming this convoluted mess where she's used and abused and thrown to the side when it comes kind of almost full circle by the end of the film, but she gives one of the more emotional performances in the film, in my opinion. Sarah Snook plays Sheila, who's his love interest later on in the film. She's the mother of the children that helped inspire the idea of the Beanie Baby. She also gives a more emotional performance than some of the other characters in the film. She's obviously a great actress, and we've seen her in Run Rabbit Run this year, which maybe wasn't an amazing movie, but she gave a really good performance in that. She's great in Succession, so she brings that quality to this film as well. I will say, while I enjoyed this movie, and probably in particular because I was kind of caught up in this Beanie Baby craze as a kid, basically, I found it really interesting to follow the story. I will say I don't know how historically accurate it is. They do acknowledge in the beginning of the film that some of the events are so wild they can't make them up, but they made up the rest of it. So it is highly dramatized, I'm assuming. But when you're watching it, it feels more in the vein of a film like Flaming Hot that came this year, opposed to a more heavy-hitting film like Blackberry or Air. It's very different telling these stories, and I will say it feels a little more conventional, those movies. Those movies feel like they kind of have an upper echelon of quality to them. This one feels like it's kind of just slightly lower than that. I will say I was kind of surprised by the chances they took with the cinematography at times. While it does stick to a kind of conventional format for a lot of the film, they did take some chances when it comes to some shots. In particular, there's one in a skating rink that I thought was a little interesting. There's also a moment where Sheila is kind of has this big reveal that they decided to do kind of a different style. So I did like that they took a little bit of chance. It's not like you're perfectly, cookie cutter cinematography. The movie has a ton of kinetic energy to it. It feels like there's constantly something happening. There are no lulls. There's kind of ridiculous moments throughout, and it makes the movie move pretty quickly. It is just under 2 hours long, but I thought it went by just like that. I will say there are a little bit of pacing issues when it comes to the actual storytelling because we are jumping back and forth between kind of three different stories. And at times it's taking place in the 80s, the early 90s, kind of the mid, late 90s. It jumps back and forth quite a bit. It does kind of come together by the end of the film, but there are times where if you kind of missed it for a second, you might not understand when things are taking place. But I will say, it creates an interesting kind of collection of stories, but at times it did mess with the pacing a little bit. So overall, if I were to rate the Beanie Bubble, I would give it a solid 7.5 out of 10. I personally really enjoyed it. Like I said, knowing kind of the history of it and being caught up in it, I found it really fascinating to see this kind of dramatization of what happened and learn some of the characters that happened along the way. But I will say it does feel, a little less than films we've seen in this year, and it probably suffers from films like Blackberry and Air coming out. It just isn't on that level of hard-hitting storytelling. It feels, like I said, far more conventional. So if you check it out, let me know what you thought about it. And I would love to hear your opinions if you've seen these other movies that have come out this year, whether it be, like I said, Air, Blackberry, Tetris, Flamin' Hot. We get a lot of these movies this year that are about the rise and sometimes fall of these big companies or these big products from the 80s and 90s. So it's kind of interesting they all came out at the same time, but I've enjoyed all of them to some degree. So again, thanks for watching. Remember to like and subscribe, and see you guys next time.